Good morning. Louder. I want to make sure. So welcome to the first plenary of Saturday. I'm so excited to be here with you. Before I start on the program, I just wanted to recognize something today. It's not working? Now you hear me better? Okay, I have to put it really close. So I just wanted to recognize something today before we start the program, and that's that my first time being at a U.S. campaign conference was in 2001. And at that time, I think we had, if I'm stretching a bit, 40 people attend in Chicago, and we stayed in dormitories for that. But I've been told that there's over 450 people registered today, so I am really inspired to see this group and to know that y'all came from all over the place and you're of all different colors and creeds and generations. So that's really amazing. And I want to recognize two of the founders of the U.S. campaign that are here, Phyllis Bennis and David Wildman. Big applause. I don't know where you two are, but there are others as well that founded U.S. campaign 17 years ago and were committed and moved it forward. And you guys are amazing people. You're visionaries. You got us here, and I just want to thank you for that. And thank you all. I mean, if you're here, it's because you're committed to human rights, you're committed to justice and the rule of law, and you're willing to put some blood, sweat, and tears behind that in your communities. It's because you believe that the future of our freedoms and civil liberties in the U.S. are inextricably linked to the freedoms and rights of people that are struggling under oppression all over the world. If you're here, it's because you know that we are stronger together and that we can rise, but only if we do it together. Last night, the opening panel and Reverend Barber took us to church. They lifted us up, and they showed us how we're all linked in our struggles and how we can achieve the freedoms that we so rightly deserve and are entitled to. But this morning, I want to bring you back down to the ground and firmly root your feet at this moment. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This moment is very dark. It's arguably one of the darkest times for Palestine and Palestinians that we've seen. And it's all a function of the last year and a half under the Trump administration, which has given sort of carte blanche to a very extreme right-wing Israeli government to do as it pleases in the occupied territories and beyond the occupied territories. In just the last year, if we kind of inventory it, we've had the U.S. Embassy moved to Jerusalem, legitimizing Israeli sovereignty over both West and East Jerusalem. We've seen now, the numbers on my paper have to change. We've seen 190 Palestinians killed in Gaza, unarmed, young protesters. We've seen 20,000 injured, maimed for life in Gaza. We've seen the U.S. cut $365 million worth of funding to UNRWA and its attempt to redefine Palestinians out of existence by forcing UN member states to change the definition of who is a Palestinian refugee. We've seen the U.S. cut all humanitarian assistance and development aid to Palestinians for things like childhood vaccinations and to keep East Jerusalem hospitals functioning. We've seen the closure of the Palestinian Representative Office in Washington, D.C., taking us back to pre-Oslo times when the PLO was a terrorist organization, and our support for Palestinian national rights is now material support for terrorism. There have been legislative initiatives to criminalize speech on campuses that criticize Israeli human rights practices in the occupied territories, labeling that hate speech and anti-Semitism. And we've seen Israel pass a constitutional law now that elevates Jewish nationality above any other nationality in historic Palestine and to say that only Jews have the right to self-determination in Israel. I would argue that despite all of this, or maybe because of all of this, we've arrived at this moment that we've all been waiting for. What is this moment? Today, support for Israel, as we know, has become a partisan issue, opening up the door for Palestinian solidarity organizations to build relationships and alliances within the Democratic Party that never could have existed before because of the stranglehold that AIPAC had over that party. Palestine has now become undeniably centered in progressive politics, while support for Israel has become associated with ethno-nationalism, illiberalism, and apartheid. In Europe and the UK, yeah, that's good. In Europe and the UK, the clarity that exists now with respect to Israel's intentions over all of historic Palestine is spurring EU member states out of their slumber. In Ireland, we've seen the passage of a bill that would criminalize importation of settlement products into Ireland. Yeah. Countries in Europe, from Spain to Slovenia, are now saying they're ready to recognize Palestine in order to delegitimize Israel's colonization over the occupied territories. And just a few days ago, the Labour Party in the UK voted to ban all arms sales to Israel. Yeah. And if Labour takes over the reins of power in the UK, we'll have our first pro-human rights government in the UK that can begin to undo the damage that was done by the promise of Lord Balfour in 1917. In Palestine, the PLO has been forced to accept the fact that bilateral negotiations with one's occupier will never ensure freedom, justice, and equality, and it's now focused on accountability against Israel and protection of the people. Cases have now been referred to the ICC, including regarding Israel's bombardment of Gaza in 2014, its colonial settlement project in the occupied territories, and its attempted destruction of the Palestinian village of Khan al-Ahmar. And yesterday, Palestine filed a proceeding with the World Court, the International Court of Justice, against the US. Yeah. It's under the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations concerning the U.S. move of its embassy to Jerusalem. Because the Vienna Convention provides for a compulsory dispute resolution, the U.S. is required to respond. More and more thought leaders and celebrities are standing up to say they won't normalize Israel's oppression of Palestinians by traveling to Israel. And ironically, it's the Jewish nation-state basic law, something Netanyahu's government hoped would end the issue of refugee return and the call for equal rights inside of Israel, that has opened up the conversation in Washington, where it's been taboo, and also in capitals around the world, about whether Israel can or ever could be both democratic and Jewish, as has been accepted as a truism. So how do we seize this moment? First, we understand how all of these developments fit together in historic Palestine. This is the aim of this morning's plenary. This panel will discuss, will take us to the front lines of Palestinian resistance. You'll hear how resistance in Gaza and Hiran and in Khan al-Ahmar are all linked despite the fragmentation of the Palestinian people. The panelists will show how Palestinians are reprioritizing the right to return that for decades has been marginalized by the peace process. We'll hear about the state of play in the region post-Arab Spring, and we'll examine how the rise of global illiberalism and ethno-nationalism is reframing international advocacy for Palestinian rights. Finally, we'll take a deep dive into the Jewish nation-state basic law to understand how it functions to deny Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinian refugees, and Palestinians living in the occupied territories their right to stay in their homeland. Our first speaker will be Miriam Barghouti. Miriam is a Palestinian-American writer and journalist, normally based in the occupied territories, but currently getting her master's degree in Scotland. Her commentaries have been published in the New York Times, El Monitor, Al Jazeera, and many other outlets. Miriam will be looking at resistance inside the occupied territories. Second is Jihad Abusalim, who's a scholar and policy analyst from occupied Gaza. He's currently working on his PhD at NYU. Jihad will be looking at the situation in Gaza since the Great Return March. He'll talk about Fatah-Hamas reconciliation efforts and the regional politics of the moment and what it means for Palestinians. We'll conclude with Hassan Jabareen, the founder and director of Adala Legal Center for Palestinian Rights. Hassan is the lead attorney for the Palestinian leadership inside the Green Line, which includes the Arab Joint List and the Knesset, which is the third largest political party in Israel. And he's the lawyer for the Arab Higher Follow-Up Committee, which includes Palestinian mayors and all of the Palestinian political parties inside of Israel. Hassan will break down the Jewish nation-state basic law for us and give us the legal ramifications of the law. So we'll start with you, Miriam.
Good morning. I hope you all had a pleasant evening and a good morning. Maybe if we can all start by, let's stand up and take a deep breath together. Just kind of to loosen up and start our morning right. So deep breath. Fill up your lungs and really feel it in there, and then exhale. And I'd like to remind us all of just how important it is to take moments to appreciate our breath and to recognize we are right now in a safe space, and how important that is to all of us as we build movements, as we build solidarity. And then we can commence. Closer. Is this better? Good? I'm usually told I have a very loud voice, so I try to, distance the mic. So in all honesty, when I was invited to speak on this panel, I had no idea what I was going to say. I called up Jihad, and I'm like, man, we've said it all. What is left to say? How can I say the number of arrests of detainees, the number of injuries, the number of martyrs, how can I say that differently anymore? Especially placing it in the context of modern day mass media and our documentation, and how well, honestly, how well Palestinians and allies have documented Israeli violations in this past decade. It's truly incredible, and it's there. I just hope it doesn't remain in the archives of history. And then I woke up this morning and I saw the sunrise, which was beautiful. I hope some of you were able to catch it. And I took a picture of the sunrise, and of course it didn't do it justice. And I realized that, when I come abroad and I give, these talks about Palestine, and I try to give updates, that I can never really hit it. I can never give the nucleus of it. I can never give the feeling of it. Of what it means to be Palestinian, of how it looks on the ground, of the feeling of tear gas, of standing in Khan al-Ahmar, which is this Bedouin community that's about to be displaced by the Israeli court through the use of law, and how it feels to look at the kids that are on the slide who are completely unaware that their home is going to be gone next month. All they care about is this orange slide that's on the side, and all of us adults are, speaking in political jargon and using all the international law terms that we can muster. And still, there was something so beautiful and so empowering about it, that 70 years later, we still find breath. 70 years later, we're still sticking together. We're on the street with all our flaws and all of our dysfunction as Palestinians and all of our fragmentation and our division, and we can still say we want to liberate Palestine. And yeah, kudos for everyone, all of us here, the Palestinians that all of this hard work, the fruits are truly coming together. And I see it in this conference that, I think Sandra, you mentioned this yesterday, that this couldn't have been possible a while ago, that this comes from the fruits of our labor. So I do want to take a moment to appreciate this as I delve into my talk, which is kind of different than most of the talks that I give in the past. I usually focus on the numbers and the statistics. And I felt so alienated from myself and from Palestine as I do that. But I will give some brief updates on what is happening on the ground. So right now, Palestinians are fighting several fronts. We are fighting Israeli colonialism. We are fighting the US with the Trump administration emboldening Israel. We are fighting the Palestinian Authority that has absolutely no problem to suffocate and oppress its own people to safeguard itself and what little legitimacy it has. We are fighting the political factions. We are fighting international actors that are obviously not interested in Palestinian demands, because in the end, oh God, Palestinians, you want to liberate yourself? But why? Why can't you just ask for some basic rights? And we're fighting that. We're trying to, terribly explain why it's important, why the word liberation, why Palestine from the river to the sea is our demand. So we're fighting all of this, and it's coming in very different manifestations right now. You see Palestinians coming together from Gaza, from the West Bank, from Haifa, from the diaspora, reminding everyone that 50% of the Palestinian population is in the diaspora. That half of Palestinians are not in Palestine. And this is a reality that we have to also understand and reconcile with and grapple with and include in our discourse, that Palestine is not the Palestinians in Palestine. That Palestine is all these refugees and those in exile that cannot return. And that's why also the right of return is so important. And that's why the March of Return in Gaza was so important. That people are going out in the streets, especially in Palestine, they're being arrested, they're being beaten, they're being tear gassed, they're being vilified abroad, they're being shamed, they're being alienated, and still they're going through with it. So while I place all of this in context, I also want to recognize just forces of oppression in general, to kind of just move a little more broad than Israel, and the strength of solidarity. To recognize that oppressors come in all different manifestations, that it comes in capitalist exploit, it comes in the form of racists and colonizers and dictators that are not just only oppressing, a specific population, like the oppressed group, but they're also indirectly oppressing those that want to stand in solidarity. They use tactics like Israel is banning people from entry for those that stand with Palestine. They use tactics of shame to shame you. Oh my God, you're standing with Palestinians? What? But they're terrorists, And still we're confronting this, that we're moving beyond, the national, the territorial boundaries, and we're going transnationally. And as the oppressors stick together, I think this is a time where activists and those in struggle are also learning to stick together. And this is so important. It's moments like this in history, moments that are testing our humanity, and that are emotionally taxing and sometimes even exhausting, that we must stand together, because the oppressors are. I see Israel using the tear gas canisters in Palestine and using them in the US. And so if they're using these strategies together, why can't we use our love for justice, our love for freedom to stick together? Okay, and this is where I get into the harder part that I usually don't. Present-day Palestine is important in terms of the resistance that's happening, because we see the Great Return March, we see the West Bank against the PA complicity, we see Haifa and Tarshiha and 48 reclaiming their Palestinianism. And what's happening is we're turning whispers into thunder. into this thunderous laughter and dance, and most importantly, into resistance. And resistance comes with anger. And this is where I'd like to, share my updates from Palestine angle from. It's from this anger. Because there were moments that I would be invited on panels, and I'm usually instructed to speak from my personal story, and to avoid certain topics I would hear, Miriam, don't be critical of the Palestinian Authority. We don't want to be airing out our laundry. Or Miriam, back everything up by international law. And all of this is said to me, forgetting that being critical of the Palestinian Authority, critical of Hamas is part of the Palestinian story, that we forget that before there was international law to back up any struggles around the world, there was only the voices of oppressed people being angry, and that it was our anger that even brought these laws to the forefront to safeguard our rights, to safeguard us. But most importantly, I was always instructed to not be emotional, to not be angry. And I mentioned this because, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I always obliged. I stuck to what I was instructed to. And today I look at the discourse on Palestine, and I notice this incredible disconnect from the Palestinian struggle and the Palestine that I live in. And I think this comes from the dishonesty with ourselves and with the world, and how, it makes me think on how the Zionists tend to reiterate Palestinians don't exist. And I think of this and I'm like, well, it's kind of true, because Palestinians are either terrorists or they're either freedom fighters. Everything that makes us up in between is completely erased. The banalities of life, my anger, my joy, is gone from the discourse. And it's really important to bring it back when we speak about resistance. And this comes with bringing back the story of anger. And I say this because when we give updates, or when I hear people give updates, we don't talk about the things that make us uncomfortable. For instance, when the knife attacks were happening in Palestine a few years ago, 2015? 2015. Palestinian youth were out in the streets carrying out knife attacks, and I'd hear Palestinians and Palestinian representation scurrying away from this topic. No one really wanted to talk about it because it shatters the image of the approachable, nonviolent Palestinian that's standing bare-chested in front of Israeli soldiers that are carrying arms. And suddenly we were confronted with anger, and that made us uncomfortable. And it's this discomfort with anger, this discomfort with violence that has created a huge gap when we speak about Palestinian resistance. So when I think of updates from Palestine and what's happening on the ground, we're angry. We're angry at a leadership that just recently in June has beaten us up, has beaten Palestinian protesters up, and I still have the scars from tasing us, because we were saying that the West Bank and Gaza are one, that the sanctions of the Palestinian Authority on Gaza, in concurrence with Israeli sanctions, are unjust, that we do not want them, that it does not represent us. And we were met with brutal violence from a leadership that claims to represent us. And this is the reality of Palestinians today. We are facing, Israel that is completely emboldened by the Trump administration. I remember in 2014, I was detained, and the soldier that detained me fabricated charges and then verbatim said, oh, today I'm gonna mess up your life. This is a soldier that was 20, 21, and this was in 2014. But he mirrors what Israel as a colonial state feels, especially now under Trump, that they feel so emboldened, declaring now Jerusalem is apparently the capital of Israel. They want to kick out people from Khan al-Ahmar. They've demolished Hiran, how many times? 110? 130? A العراقيب. Oh, this is...
Continue, and we hope that Hiran will continue to be.
But look at us discussing, no, that's another village that they demolished 130 times. You're thinking of another one. This is the sad reality. We're angry at Arab complicity, and we're angry at the international community that has tried for so long to strip our story and compartmentalize it and take the whole apart and tell us compromise, 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 concede, concede, concede. 25 years later, and I'm 25, and I have no reality beyond Oslo, and I have seen nothing but an increase in apartheid walls. I've seen nothing but an increase in checkpoints and an increase of soldiers raiding Palestinian villages and young children having to learn what torture means because they're getting arrested in night raids. So we are so angry. And I want that to sink in, this anger, because this is the nucleus of the Palestinian story. This is the nucleus of any update that's coming from Palestine. The numbers, the statistics, the charts, the personal narratives, these are all just, they're manifestations of this anger towards these violations that are happening against us. And so to bridge the gap that is happening between, the international community and resistance and Palestine and the struggle in Palestine, I think we need to be brave enough to begin including in our discourse and addressing violence and addressing the anger of Palestinians. Awesome. And I say this because I also see how the lack of this discourse has disconnected us from the regional politics as well, has disconnected us, because I know, for me, the story of liberation is not just Palestine. The story of liberation for me is Syria, it is Bahrain, it is Yemen, it is the US. That's what it is. It's all of this. And once we're brave enough to start discussing these things that make us uncomfortable, we can start extending the solidarity past Palestine as well. And what a beautiful world I think we can build together. And I'll conclude with a good note. So with everything that's happening in terms of the fragmentation in Palestine, we're divided. Me and Jihad can't meet in Palestine because he's from Gaza and I'm from the West Bank. So, you have Israel that's separated us, and now a lot of people will make you think that Gaza is its own country, by the way. So apparently Gaza is its own country and the West Bank is its own country. But despite this fragmentation in these last few years, there has been a coming together of Palestinian. And although it's been split up, chronologically, you can't really see it, but it's been happening since 2010. That Palestinians are coming together and we're building these bridges. You have people in Haifa saying, no, I am not an Israeli Arab, and I'm going to say I'm Palestinian, that I will not shove my Palestinianism into the corners of our home in Haifa. No, that I will go out in the street and I will protest. And I will protest with Gaza. And not only in solidarity, but I will protest because Gaza is Palestinian and I'm Palestinian too. And you see Palestinians in the West Bank doing the same thing, that they're going on the streets, not just against Israel, but against people, the P8, which is something that I think is also important to recognize because it's so terribly brave to go against the people that are supposed to be your own, that are supposed to represent you, and to say no, to simply say no. And they are doing this. Palestinians are doing this, and I'm hoping that we take this as a model to see that despite the powers, and they are powerful powers, that are trying to divide us and fragment us, that have taken 50% of the population, taken them abroad, that we are finding ways to come together, that we are shifting narrative. And to take this as a model, to shift narratives in all of our struggles, and to be able to say, you know what, yeah, we can come together. And we can share each other's stories whole. That we don't have to break them apart. That we can speak about the joy and the sorrow and the anger together. And now Jihad, Hassan are going to give you updates on Gaza and the nation-state bill, which I hope will clarify in more details after my broad contextualization. But thank you.
Good morning. I'm known to share depressing remarks, but I promise this won't be 100% as such. So on March 30th of this year, thousands of Palestinians in the occupied and blockaded by both Israel and Egypt, and now the PA, Gaza Strip, did something extraordinary. Although marching for return was not an unprecedented event in Palestinian history, the March of Return from Gaza represented something new for Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere. This was one of the rare moments in Palestinian history when ordinary Palestinians, with the help and vision and direction of their grassroots organizers, activists, civil society, and organic intellectuals, decided that it is about time to implement the right of return. And so it was a march of return and for return by the people for their dignity, honor, and above all, for their humanity. Yesterday was the 27th Friday since the unfolding of the March of Return. 190 Palestinians were murdered, more than 20,000 injured, some of whom will spend the rest of their lives with permanent disabilities. Just yesterday, Gaza said farewell to Muhammad Ashraf al-Awawda, 26 years old, Muhammad Bassam Shakhsa, 24 years old, Muhammad Walid Haniya, 23 years old, Iyad Khalil al-Sha'ir, 18 years old, Muhammad Ali Nshasi, 18 years old, Muhammad Naif al-Houm, 14 years old, and Nasser Azmi Masbah, 12 years old. May they rest in peace. The March of Return from the Gaza Strip is a human moment, and like most human moments, it evokes a mix of conflicting feelings and emotions. I am proud of my people, proud of their bravery, of their defiance, of their refusal to live in a world where boundaries and demographic realities are dictated through the barrel of a gun. I'm also inspired. What could be more inspiring than the scenes of unarmed young and elderly, women and men, cutting with their bare hands the barbed wires of the Nakba, of refugeehood, and of years of separation from a homeland that is a stone's throw from where most of them are forced to live, in the open-air prison that is the Gaza Strip. And while proud and inspired, I mourn. I mourn the early departure of all those who were murdered by this merciless occupation. People were killed, most of them young. The 20, 18, 16 years old amongst them were not supposed to depart their families, friends, and this world that early. I think of their parents, families, and friends. I think of hundreds of young people who lost their limbs and ended up with permanent disabilities. How are they going to spend the rest of their lives? How are they going to survive in a place like the Gaza Strip? And amongst those hard to navigate thoughts, there's one question that I deem the elephant in the room, and it's a tough one. Why? Why is it that after 27 Fridays, 190 killed, 20,000 injured, why has nothing changed in Gaza? In fact, things are changing there, but from bad to worse. Just 2 days ago, the World Bank issued a report as part of its long tradition of issuing reports, warning that Gaza's economy is collapsing, that it's in free fall, the report said. Unemployment is more than 50%, while 70% of young people are jobless. 1 out of 2 lives under poverty line. But unlike the World Bank report and many other reports, the March of Return was and still is a political movement of mass popular mobilization rooted in a long history of organizing and popular resistance. In contexts of struggle for liberation, where people stand to well-armed and well-equipped systems of settler colonial oppression, like that of Israel, movements of mass popular mobilization, like the March of Return, derive their power from how the world reacts to such moments. Mass popular mobilization may not have the ability to end this or that system of oppression, but what makes it powerful is that it appeals to the sensibilities of the larger world and says, look, something is wrong in this or that place, and it's on the world to take the necessary actions to fix the situation. Unfortunately, we live in a global moment that is very hostile towards popular mass mobilization. To answer the question of why the March of Return hasn't been able yet to bring about neither return, the ultimate demand, nor an end of the blockade, the minimum demand, it's worth taking a moment to think about the larger contexts in which the Gaza Strip exists today. Like I said, and like my colleagues here pointed out, we live in a global moment, and on a global level, where there is a rise of the right wing, of chauvinism, and there is weakening of what already were dysfunctional international institutions that were supposed and are supposed to hold states and governments accountable. And there is a growing tendency amongst states to care less about human rights and oppression in other countries and only focus on narrow economic and geopolitical interests. On an Arab level, the Arab world was a stage and is still a stage for the century's largest assault on people's movements of demand and change. The past decade was one of hope and despair for Arabs, was a decade of revolution and counter-revolution. And the setback of the Arab uprisings brought regimes and preserved regimes that are less ashamed of sidelining the Palestinian cause like never before. After all, the Palestinian cause is about rebellion, defiance, and challenging status quos imposed by violence, and those regimes perceive such values as threats. And on a Palestinian level, the fragmentation of our body politique continues to weaken us more and more. Palestinian communities in the West Bank, like Mariam described earlier, they continue to live under the despotic rule of a Palestinian authority that is only good at policing its people in service of the occupation and protecting a parasitic class that profits from the status quo. That, in addition to the PA's sanctions on Gaza, we haven't even gotten to the sanctions against our occupier. And we have a Palestinian authority that is engaged in imposing sanctions on our people in Gaza. Hamas in the Gaza Strip continues to rule over the Gaza Strip with no vision whatsoever on how to move forward. And while doing so, within its ranks emerged a security regime with powers that are hard to hold accountable. Both parties continue to negotiate in what seems to be an endless effort to achieve national reconciliation, an end that is harder to achieve than one might think, and no one exactly knows how two contradictory programs and visions can be reconciled. Abbas-led Fatah seeks to disarm Gaza. That's the ultimate demand. And this is a demand that the Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip deem nothing, no less than political suicide. It's a mutually exclusive and a zero-sum situation. Followers of both Hamas and Fatah in both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip subscribe to their parties in a tribal manner. And those parties don't engage their bases in politics in a democratic and healthy manner. And a small glimpse into the state of Palestinian social media debates can show how devastating Palestinian fragmentation has become. Palestinians in Israel face existential threats as Israel metamorphosizes into its real image, a racist and an apartheid regime. And the state of Palestinians in the diaspora, I'm sure, is well known for many in this room. This is a rather grim, broader picture of the situation. But is there hope? The answer is yes. There is hope, and despite this grim reality, there are many reasons for us to be optimistic. Moments of setback can be moments of opportunity too. And here comes the March of Return to stand as a model for us to follow and be inspired by. Palestinians in Gaza, despite blockade and war, and despite miseries of poverty and unemployment, 4 hours of electricity a day, people shower twice a week, people cook, like main dishes 2 days, 7 days a week. Despite all of that, they continue to prove that a just cause can never vanish into the thin air only due to power asymmetry and challenges. The fact that Palestinians in Gaza continue to struggle tirelessly, despite Palestinian fragmentation, despite Arab counter-revolutionary regimes, despite international indifference and complicity, should be a source of inspiration to Palestinians in Jerusalem, in Haifa, in Chicago, in the UK, in Chile, and in the Arab world, to continue to struggle for our self-determination and liberation. It should also inspire people of conscience worldwide, progressives, friends, and allies, to seek to change the world, make it a better, civilized place, free of imperialism and aggression, a world that values human rights, freedom, equality, and dignity, not chauvinism, borders, and racial and economic injustices. So what can exactly be done? In this great gathering of organizers from all over the US, we have the opportunity to come together to work on issues with ongoing activism. This is a valuable opportunity for all of us. And here I call upon you, my dear colleagues, to consider intensifying your efforts with regards to Gaza, because all indications on the ground show that collapse is not imminent. It is actually happening. Gaza still needs a lot of education in the US, more awareness raising, and it definitely needs a shift in discourse. Addressing Gaza will never become an easier task in this country unless we address this issue or the many issues that have to deal with Gaza on a more regular basis, and not wait for when it's massacre season to take action. Between each aggression, Gaza still suffers from a horrible blockade that represents slow death for people there. Gaza needs campaigns to address the many aspects of the blockade, such as issues of movement, of students and patients. Just in the past 2 months, more than 50 cancer patients died while waiting for permits just to cross to hospitals in the West Bank. Of issues electricity and water. How is it that in the 21st century, people in Gaza live with 4 hours of electricity a day? Nutrition, which is starting to become a serious issue, and so on. And of course, while dealing with such urgent issues, one needs not to forget the larger political issues at the core of why there is injustice in Gaza today. And not only in Gaza, but also in the rest of Palestine. And of course, chiefly the issue of refugees and the injustices that were committed in 1948. This kind of work that will help Palestinians in Gaza this is the kind of work that will help Palestinians in Gaza on short and long terms. And this kind of work is inseparable from the rest of the work that would make our world a better place. A world where the cries of Palestinian protesters in Gaza will be heard, and children like 12 years old Nasser Misbah will live to flourish and prosper, go to school, read stories, and play, rather than get shot at the fence by a coward sniper safeguarding the insecurities of a settler colonial state. A world that is what the March of Return seeks, and with your help, with your determination, with your work, a world like that shall be realized here and in Palestine, inshallah. Thank you.
Sabah al-khair, good morning. I am a lawyer and I am not succeeding fully to speak or to argue while I am sitting. So it's okay for you if I stand? Yes. So good morning. Miriam spoke about resistance from anger, and Jihad spoke about the worst situation maybe on the earth, but he said we struggle with optimism. And I am saying I am struggling not with anger, but with passionate, with full hope that we will win. We will win because our struggle is moral. We are not struggling against the rights of Israeli Jews to live with peace in Palestine. We are struggling against the last colonial racist regime on the earth. This is why I believe that we will win, and we won't let frustration to control our struggle. If I lose case before Israeli courts, and I lose a lot, I say I didn't lose today. Justice was lost. So this is how I see the situation, the spirit. Without spirit, passionate optimism, we cannot continue and we won't reach the victory. So I call for all of us to see those moments in this way. Since I made the distinction between the regime and the peoplehood, I want to speak about the ability to change the discourse of the Palestinian human rights movement from statehood, partitioning, to focus on the character of Israeli regime as one regime, not as a regime that managed two legal systems, one on West Bank, Gaza, and one on the Green Line. West Bank, Gaza, including Jerusalem. But one legal regime, and what kind of this regime is, and what is our strategy toward this regime. So the nation-state law could be perceived not just as constitutional moment. It's also a political moment to evaluate our strategies and tactics. State law say, Article number 1, that the land of Israel, meaning Palestine, all Palestine, is the historical homeland for the Jewish people. Even not for Israeli Jews, for the Jewish people. And it continue and say that the state of Israel embodies the right of self-determination for Jewish people, and only for the Jewish people. So this article speaks on the meaning of we the people, as we the Jewish people of all Palestine. Now, the legal question is, whether there is a constitution today on the earth that include such statement about the definition of the political community, which refers only to one ethnic group, and we the people meant like we were the white people. There is no one constitution today that has such a statement. And we know, the constitutional lawyers know that the definition of we the people is the most important definition in the Constitution. It defines the meaning of equality. It defines who is politically in and who is politically out. And we know that when US define we the people, we the white people, it leads to slavery, segregation. The last regime on the earth that defined we the people in this ethnic way, it was the apartheid regime. The nation state law also continue and say that the state of Israel must promote Jewish settlement. Jewish settlement meaning in the Green Line and beyond the Green Line. So, if we compare it to the Constitution of South Africa of 1983, when South Africa regime tried to ease the international pressure, they offer what they called a new constitution in order to be perceived as they are easing the discrimination and the pressure over the black. Their new constitution in 1983 defined we the people as we the white, Asians, and colored. The official languages are the Afrikaner, English, and in the area of the black tribes, if they use a language, we will recognize it. The right of human dignity and right of equality will be ensured for all. This constitution that was condemned by the UN Security Council as a legitimate constitution, as racist constitution, as colonial one because it excluded directly the blacks, it's much better relatively than the Israeli. First, it includes some groups, the Israeli just one, Jewish people. About the official languages, before the nation state law, the Arabic officially was official language based on Israeli law. Now just the Hebrew is the official language. In South Africa was more. In Israel, basic laws, it has 13 basic laws. And this basic law that I'm speaking about, it's the law of the laws. It's the basic law of the basic laws because it's ensured the constitutional identity. There is no one basic law that ensures the right of equality. Israel is the only country on the earth that the right of equality is not enumerated as constitutional rights. There is no one country on the earth that its constitution doesn't have. So, if I am a lawyer, you know, lawyers are very pragmatic. We are the pragmatic. We have all the time to choose between two worse things. What's the less worse? So if I am a lawyer of the Palestinian people and they will tell me what do you want to choose, the Constitution of South Africa in 1983 or the basic laws of Israel, I will choose South Africa. Because what it includes. Now, what that mean for us? That mean that all of our discourse as a human rights movement in Palestine should be changed. We speak about Israel regime as exercising two legal systems. If I am lawyer, or staff member of Palestinian human rights organization West Bank. I will speak only about IHL. Israel doesn't respect the international humanitarian law, the occupation law. This is the only language that I know. If I am a lawyer, Palestinian lawyer, in the Green Line, I said Israel doesn't respect democracy in the meaning that doesn't respect the right of equality of Palestinian citizens of Israel. But this nation state law suspend both legal systems. It suspends the international humanitarian law because international humanitarian law say that the occupying power should take care for the interest of the population that occupied and is allowed to limit their rights only for security reasons. This big law applied to the West Bank and suspend IHL. The concept of IHL is suspended. This also suspend the concept of rule of law and a democracy in the Green Line. Now, legally, there are only two legitimate legal systems that they are recognized in international law. The IHL, and the second, the national law that respect equality before the law. This nation-state law suspend both. So if suspend both, where it enters to? Any legal system that suspend both legitimate legal system, it enters to colonialism. This is why colonialism defined as a legitimate regime, because it doesn't respect either. So we have to start to reconceptualize differently our discourse. This basic law said it's not a matter of IHL or it's matter of rule of law. It's matter of racism. And we have to define it that this is a racist regime. This is a racist regime not because it's a practice only, because it's what's written in its constitution. This is why this nation-state law is constitutional and political moment for us. Before we spoke about Israeli practices, and Israel all the time said, well, those practices are temporary, could be changed. This nation-state law embodied the practices, regularize it, and make it permanent as constitution. This is the difference between constitution and law. Regular laws are permanent, can be changed on the normal politics, the politics of daily day. Constitution come to control the future politics because it's permanent. So here, instead all the time to speak that Israel exercised two legal systems, we have to speak about Israel regime as one legal system where there is superiority of 50% of the population because their ethnic belonging over the other 50% of the population who live under the jurisdiction of Israel law. There is no one country on the earth that has this character. There is no one country has, and even Israeli legal scholars, they were against this constitutional law, the nation-state law, because they agreed that there is no one constitution that include this aspect. Now, of course, it's not a new thing for us. And we are aware that the Israeli Supreme Court say in many decisions what this nation-state law say. But now, it's in the Constitution. So it should affect and influence our discourse. That means that we have to move from the discourse of statehood and partitioning to rights. Right of the Palestinian people precedes partitioning of Palestine. Rights of Palestinian people precedes the concept of one state or two states or three states. First, we have to speak about the rights of the Palestinian people. Our answer to this law that spoke about the right of Jewish people is to speak about the self-determination of Palestinian people in Palestine. And the self-determination of the Palestinian people in Palestine means that every Palestinian is allowed to live with security, equality, and human dignity in any place in Palestine. This concept moves us from the debate whether you are for one state or two states. We don't have to care whether it will be 2 or 3 or 5 states. We care first to define the concept of rights. Oslo put us in the opposite direction. Let us first speak about partitioning and then let's speak about rights. But partitioning is usually about 2 things, geography and demography. So when we spoke about partitioning first, demography, we said Israel must keep Jewish majority inside the green line. And the right of Palestinians to return is out of the discourse. And when we spoke about demography, we said the Palestinians inside the green line are minority within the Jewish state. And all the Palestinian people will have the right to exercise their rights of self-determination only in West Bank and Gaza. 12 million only in that space. Now we have to change it. We have to change it and to speak first about the rights. This was the discourse of the BLO until the 70s, 1970s. The slogan of the BLO was to recognize the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. That moved after Oslo to recognize Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem. And our language was changed. For us, there is something called Palestine as geography. We are Palestinians because there is Palestine. And there is Palestine because we are Palestinians. Oslo changed the concept and make Palestine is only referred to West Bank and Gaza. Because it's about geography and demography. And became something called the State of Israel, which means Israel in its geographical meaning and its administrative meaning. In the past, we make distinction. We make distinction between the name of geography, that the name of geography called Palestine, as the nation state law called the Hebrew name to all Palestine, Eretz Israel, land of Israel. Our language didn't change. We called it Palestine in the past. And we call the state of Israel as the administrative apparatus. We made this distinction between regime and geography. But the policy of partitioning changed the language. The state of Israel means the geography and the administrative apparatus. This is why what I am saying, that to change the discourse is also a matter of changing the language. When I sit with one of the, what they call state attorney that belong to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, sometimes I got confused. When he defined himself, I am the state attorney of Palestine. But he meant the state attorney of Ramallah. I said, you are the state attorney of Nazareth, you mean? No, Nazareth is Israel. So this is what happened to us. What's good in this group, maybe because you speak English and not Arabic or Hebrew, I felt that it didn't change the language. When you speak about Palestine, as Zaha started, she meant one thing that we know it geographically, what Palestine meant. About the civil rights movement for Palestinian rights, usually it emphasized three things: end of occupation, right of return, and equality for Palestinian citizens inside the Green Line. This is also about fragmentation. You like fragment the struggle because you still perceive Israel as a regime who exercise different legal systems. This is why you put it in this way. We have to focus on something. We are against Israel regime because this regime is racist. It's colonial and belong to the family of apartheid regimes. It's simple. This is why, without to make it complicated, it's racist regime, and maybe the most racist one because it's the only regime that half of the population control other half of the population who live under the same jurisdiction. It's the racist and colonial regime because it's the longest regime that exercised emergency regulation over other group for 70 years. In the modern history, we don't have one regime like that. It's the racist regime because this is the only regime today on the earth that defines citizenship, that it belongs only to one ethnic group based on the law of return. It's the last colonial Western regime because it exercised the longest time of occupation after the Second World War. So this is why we are against it. And if we clarify that, it will be easy for us to gain the support of the Palestinian population in Palestine and also some of Israeli Jews. This is if we focus on rights, you define what the regime is. I want right of self-determination of Palestinian people. It's imminent request because the regime is colonial, but not to fragment the rights. If you fragment the rights, we can find for you solution through geography and demography. You come back to partitioning. This is the message that I wanted to convey today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam and Jihad and Hassan, for your remarks. Incredible, and we are so far behind the time. So we're going to do some lightning round questions, and I'm going to just pose 3 to you. You can choose to answer all 3. You could choose to pick on one, but I want you to end on the vision question, all 3 of you. So Oslo is dead. I think we all can agree on that much, and we all can agree the damage that it's done, both in terms of Palestinian ability to resist on the ground, and also in terms of framing the conflict in a way that skewed it into an issue of parcels of land rather than about the rights of people. So now that we've reprioritized refugee rights and we've reprioritize the narrative of the Palestinian Nakba and all that the Palestinians continue to suffer following the Nakba, what opportunities are opened up now in the fragmented communities in which Palestinians live? What opportunities have opened up now for coordinating on resistance and for working more in coordination than we've seen, really? Because I feel like we've seen Palestinians working in silos. While the resistance has been amazing in East Jerusalem with the prayer protests, and amazing in Gaza with the amount of people that have come out all of these Fridays to protest, how sustainable is that? How sustainable is it to have a generation of maimed young people coming out every day? Is there a unified leadership that can come together in the same way that we saw in the first Intifada to coordinate activities across all of the communities? So those are 2 questions, really. Coordination, and is there a leadership? Then I want you to end with, if you envision Palestine, what does your Palestine look like today? And are you in that vision? Do you see yourself in that vision, or is that something so far off for you that you're not a part of it?
Okay, wow. So the March of Return, the reason why I said that this is a model that, I think there is a lot to learn from. It's because young Palestinians in Gaza tried for long to organize such initiatives through the traditional frameworks, mainly the Palestinian factions or the Palestinian NGOs, and in the negative connotation of NGOs here. And for long, Palestinians in Gaza, those organizers and the young people who took upon themselves making possible the March of Return, they really suffered with these frameworks because they found more obstacles in them than actually, things that would make them easier. Israeli propaganda, Zionist propaganda and its friends argue and claim that the March of Return is orchestrated by Hamas, but we all know that this is all false, and just a little bit of familiarity with who went and who participated in the March of Return, who sacrificed their lives and went to the borders, who organized the reading circles, the Dabka performances, the tents by the border, were not only from one faction. They represented all aspects of Palestinian society. The reason why I'm talking about this is to mention that it is possible for Palestinian communities to actually work beyond the factional frameworks I recognize the sacrifices and the work that most Palestinian factions have done over time, but when you get to a point where these factions, these existing structures with their hierarchies, with their systems that are rooted in just dictating and giving orders without engaging people in politics, without actually considering the agency of its membership and of its base. When those frameworks become rusty, become an obstacle, it's about time for people to go beyond, to actually organize beyond these frameworks. And here I think, in terms of coordination between Palestinians in the homeland and Palestinians in the diaspora, there is a generation that is sick and tired of the old traditional factional politics. There is a generation that wants unity, that seeks unity. There is a generation within, say, Islamist Palestinians that does not want to adopt the similar vision that Palestinian Islamists adopted in the past. There is a generation within the Palestinian left that wants to imagine a different way of defining what does it mean to be a leftist Palestinian. And there is a generation within, say, Fatah that wants to abandon the really confusing character of that movement that is free of any kind of ideology or vision, and just let's move beyond this factional nature of how they do politics. And this generation, we see it in Ramallah, we see it in Haifa, we see it in Gaza, we see it in the US. I mean, Palestinian Americans took part in SGPs. They organize within their communities. There is a generation that was born and grew up here that understands this country, and on them actually the responsibility doubles. I mean, while they seek to maintain and preserve their culture and their belonging to their homeland, they are also, living in countries where they can actually work, do real work that can leverage themselves and their fellow Palestinians in the homeland. So I think the diaspora is an important area, it's an important field for us to do this work, and I call upon the Palestinian diaspora. I mean, as somebody from Gaza, the more powerful we are in our work here, in leveraging ourselves and working with allies and working with friends and working with people of color, with people from all the spectrum, as long as they're progressive and with great politics. As long as we're doing that work, we're leveraging not only ourselves here in face of Islamophobia and a police state and so on, but also we're leveraging our people back home, because when there is a march of return and Israel kills, people on the border or by the fence, we can actually use this leverage to hold Israel accountable. So I think all things are connected, and they're more connected than ever before thanks to social media. There are platforms now where Palestinians living in geographically separated islands can be in touch with each other, and we see that. We see Palestinians from the West Bank getting in touch with Palestinians in 48, with Palestinians in Gaza, despite the physical barriers. And we need more of building these bridges, and we need support and assistance from our friends and allies here to help us realize that, because this is the if people want to be morally and ethically committed towards the Palestinian cause, it's one of the most important things is to help us overcome Palestinian fragmentation. So, I guess time.
Okay, I'll be very brief because of time. And okay, for the question on the vision and the coordinating and mobilizing, many times I'm confronted with the question on coordinating efforts and bringing together. And for me, it's less about that and recognizing that, because people in general, as communities, we're very different. It's more about coordinating a goal. And that's why what Hassan was saying is so important, that we have to shift the narrative towards the rights. And then for me, it's less, we don't really have to be doing the same thing together, but we can be doing these different things depending on our capacity, depending on our positions and where we are towards that goal. And I think that's done a lot more easily with the resources and tools that we have present day. On our vision and leadership, this is a really difficult question that I often grapple with. But yeah, Oslo's dead, just in case anyone was wondering. And for me and the vision of Palestine, whether I live in it, I always revert to this this quote by a friend of mine, and it's a line in a poem of his: "I am Palestinian until it is liberated, and then I am free." And for me, it really summarizes just my vision for Palestine, that I can't even go beyond that at this point, that we struggle, we move, we build this community. But what I think is great here is that we have a chance to build this community that we want to build, that is based on love, on justice, on breaking the national boundaries and coming together with struggles. Yeah, I think that's good enough.
About the discourse about the Nakba and the vision. Yeah, I am asked lately from many Israeli Jewish students, why just lately all the Palestinian people speak about the Nakba? It wasn't really just lately we start to put it as sword for our political activities in Haifa, in Nazareth, in Gaza, in West Bank, mostly in the area where it's the Nakba exercised strongly in the Green Line and Gaza, because 2/3 of Gaza are refugees. The reason that I answer that every people catastrophe takes time to realize the catastrophe of it. The Holocaust, the Jewish people and the Israeli Jews start to speak about it just in the 60s, years after. And it wasn't new. And just lately start to be the strongest discourse. This is why, one of the reasons that now we are speaking about Nakba. But in the minute that you brought the Nakba discourse, which emphasized the historical injustice of the Palestinian people, this discourse will never and cannot be stopped. So any political solution must answer this historical injustice. Now, the two-state solution didn't give answer. This is why today, if the PA will ask the Palestinian people to have demonstration for two-state solution, you won't find just the police of the BA demonstrate. But if you have about the Nakba and the injustice, you will find thousands and maybe millions, and not in Palestine, also in the refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan. This is why this is the strongest one. Now about the vision. Now, some moved from two-state solution to one-state solution. Why they move? They say, oh, well, two-state solution doesn't work. It's difficult to be implemented, so we have to move one state. I say, give me a break. If two-state didn't work, now one state will work based on you. And your vision of one state, what about the settlements in West Bank? What about the settlements in East Jerusalem? You maybe now justify, and this is maybe what the right wing wants. The right wing of Israel wants this concept. They are against two-state. So what is the solution? The vision. The vision is for us, the Palestinians, and who support us. We have no reason to accept any superiority, Jewish superiority in Palestine. We have no reason to accept that there is one Israeli Jewish person in Palestine has more rights than Palestinian person. The same also. We don't accept that the Palestinian person will have more rights than Israeli Palestinian. So we are speaking about this framework against discrimination, against depression, against oppression. Meaning we have to bring the concept of peoplehood, right of self-determination of Palestinian people, which includes, by its meaning, the collective rights of the Palestinian people and the individual rights of Palestinians. In this way, I can give answer to the settlement. I am struggling against the settlement because it's racist colonial. Because it's emphasized the superiority against the Palestinian people. I am against moving the embassy to Jerusalem because moving the embassy, it's emphasizing the superiority of the Israelis over the Palestinians. So this is the vision that let us take away one state or two states to the people. And this vision is the only one that gained popularity among the Palestinian people. This what my two young colleagues wanted to emphasize. In all of their talks, Ramallah speak to Gaza, to Haifa, and here Haifa speak to Gaza. And about what they speak. They speak about their rights as one people. This is our why. We don't celebrate, we are in Haifa, don't demonstrate for the Gaza people in Gaza because they are under Israeli occupation only. We don't demonstrate there just because we are against Israeli occupation over part of our Palestinian people. We are demonstrating there because we perceive that we is belong to us. Gaza is part of our we. And this belongs to every nationhood. The PLO want to be beyond that without understanding what's the power of nationalism. When Abu Mazen, and I will finish here with Abu Mazen. Abu Mazen had two talks in the UN about one subject. The first one before a couple of years when he came to the General Assembly to convince them to recognize Palestine, the meaning West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, as independent state. He failed. But his talk, his speech was about the Nakba. All the Palestinian people welcome his speech. We believe that he spoke on our behalf. We have support demonstration in Haifa, Gaza, and Lebanon, and Jordan, and everywhere to his speech, despite the fact that he failed. The second speech, after 2-3 years, he came to the same General Assembly to ask the recognition. He succeeded, but his speech was about only Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza. He came back to Ramallah and he said, we need demonstration to support me. The mayor of Nazareth called me, well, Abu Mazen wants support because he succeeded. Maybe in Haifa and Nazareth will do demonstration to express our happiness for his success. I told him, if you will find 100 persons to demonstrate, it will be a miracle. And indeed, despite the success internationally, he failed to have one demonstration in Ramallah to welcome him except the police. Because the discourse was different. It wasn't the first was about the Nakba. Because people want to speak about their historical justice, injustice, not about administrative apparatus of statehood. Thank you.